This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, Tlaib comes out for Jim Crow-style laws and also for arrests of her political foes. With us this evening, Robert Spencer, the director of Jihad Watch and a Shillman Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center. His new book is The History of Jihad, From Muhammad to ISIS. Robert, welcome back to the Glazov Gang.
Always great to talk to you, Jamie. How are you?
Fantastic. And Robert, the show tonight is credited to your article at PJ Media, where you discussed Rashida Tlaib coming out for Jim Crow-style laws and also for arrests of her political foes. What an eerie, frightening, surreal time that we're in. My family escaped the Soviet Union, but the Soviet Union has come to us. Robert, before we get into that issue, this actually involves you very personally in terms of what people like Rashida Tlaib are supporting. How is the totalitarian deep state cracking down on you recently?
Well, recently it's been more of the same in terms of the deplatforming. I checked actually the numbers for the first time in probably over a year. I looked at the Jihad Watch month-by-month numbers, and I saw that the readership is about half what it was this time 2 years ago. And it's not because people are less interested in this issue. I see it when I go speak around. It's not because certainly there's less jihad activity. There's more than ever. But the social media giants that control the public discourse more than any totalitarian state ever did, they are cracking down on any dissenting voices and choking us out, making sure that as few people as possible see what we have to say. And that, of course, goes along with the ongoing efforts to stigmatize and demonize any dissenting voice so that there are points of view are not just not heard, but when they are heard, they are misrepresented and shunned by people who think that we're somehow evil. And so what happened to me recently, I was invited to speak up in New Hampshire at the Sullivan County Republican Party meeting. And so I was happy to be there and to speak for them. But the Democrats in the Sullivan County area of New Hampshire, they were absolutely enraged. And the newspapers, of course, the New Hampshire Union Leader and the Valley News of Sullivan County were publishing all this Southern Poverty Law Center defamation, and State Senator Martha Hennessy and the Democratic the Democratic State Chairman Raymond Buckley both denounced me and demanded that I be canceled. And actually, I was canceled by 2 venues there before a third was found where the event went off. And this is the same thing, of course, happened to Brigitte Gabriel at Mar-a-Lago, where it should not have happened because that's Trump's hotel in Florida. But it's clear that people who run these businesses, they just don't want any trouble, which is completely understandable. They don't want protesters outside their establishments. They don't want controversy in the papers, and so they cancel us. And the left is pursuing this policy increasingly and showing thereby that their totalitarian heart. As, of course, the front page masthead says, inside every liberal is a totalitarian screaming to get out. And that's what we're seeing more and more. They're getting out, and they are shutting us down wherever they can, and they're open and unapologetic about it. They don't believe in free discourse. They don't believe in free speech. They don't believe in honest discussion or debate. They only want to silence us.
Absolutely. And some very eerie things are happening to us as well. I mean, Annie Cyrus just being shadow banned, and all kinds of censorship going on with her on social media, and of course when she's trying to speak at venues, etc. Even with the Glazov Gang, something very strange is happening with our YouTube subscribers and other matters. So the deep state and the left is at work. Now, this is our hook to our issue this evening. Rashida Tlaib, Robert, you wrote about, she's made some very interesting statements about what should be done to Trump cabinet members that failed to comply with congressional subpoenas. What was she saying?
Yeah, what she said was, and I quote, "They're trying to figure out, no joke, is it the DC police that goes and gets them? We don't know. Where do we hold them?" And so she's just assuming that it's good and proper to arrest and hold these people for not complying with these subpoenas. There's nothing illegal about that. These things, especially in light of the illegality of the entire process of the impeachment that was very, very ably set out several days ago by President Trump's lawyers, showing that due process is being violated. The president is not being allowed to face his accusers. He's not being allowed, his lawyers are not being allowed to question the people who are accusing him, and so on and so on. And so they're not complying with this. And Rashida Tlaib is saying, well, we're going to come and arrest the people who are not complying, which only compounds the illegality of the whole enterprise. And she says, I will tell them they can hold all these people right here in Detroit. So I think that it's a very extraordinary thing that the party that's supposed to be about non-discrimination and freedom and all the things that leftists say they stand for is now openly endorsing practices that only took place in totalitarian states.
And so do you think that the Rashida's police will come in the middle of the night like the KGB would do?
Yeah, I think so, because obviously the object that she has in mind is to terrify and cow into submission the people when they see what happens to the people who stick their neck out, to make sure that nobody else does anything. That's another thing. That's another reason why I had this experience in New Hampshire, and of course I've had it elsewhere all over the country previously. The left knows that if they can defame me publicly and get me canceled, and they get away with it, then other people are also going to be afraid. They're going to be afraid to speak out. They're going to see what happens when people tell the truth, and they're going to say, I'm just going to keep my head down and hope they don't come for me. And that's exactly what the citizens of totalitarian states did. And that's why the Soviet Union was able to last for 70 years, because most of the people there simply knew that if they did anything, they'd end up in the gulag. If they said anything, their lives would be ruined and the lives of their families would be ruined. So they kept quiet and just tried to get by as best they could.
You know, the left is very shrewd and successful in how, in a lot of ways, they've conquered, Robert. You know, we can say that they're winning. We can still try to fight, and we will continue to fight. But they really have won on many spheres. You can't say anything about Islam anymore. You can't even say anything about the left anymore without being called a hater and Islamophobe and all kinds of things, right?
Yeah. You know, I think it's astonishing how diabolically clever they are at these things. Because you have, for example, George Soros. And of course, George Soros's money, as many have noted, is behind a lot of these initiatives. And so many Republican leaders have criticized George Soros for this, quite rightly. And the Democratic talking points that may have come from Soros himself, for all I know, but certainly they all say the same things. And what they say now is that it's anti-Semitic to criticize Soros because Soros is Jewish. Now, let's remember, you can go on YouTube right now, Jamie, and don't do it right now, but you can go on YouTube anytime and find George Soros telling 60 Minutes in an interview years ago that he was a Nazi collaborator during World War II, and that he would help the Nazis in clearing out, seizing Jewish property and clearing out the people who owned the property and making them sure they were sent to camps. And so this is a guy who is ethnically Jewish, but he was as un-Jewish as you could possibly be. He's somebody who was betraying the Jewish people at a time when they were subjected to the most unimaginable horrors. And yet now it's anti-Semitic to say anything about him. And it's the same thing with Adam Schiff, who I didn't even know was Jewish until the other day. I saw that Trump was being accused of anti-Semitism for criticizing him. And it's the same thing. These people are the worst enemies of the state of Israel and of the Jewish people. But the Democrats know how to use the big lie propaganda. And it apparently works with people who are uninformed and easily led.
Yeah, absolutely. This whole thing that they've achieved where if somebody that's not of the left criticizes a leftist that happens to be a person of color, then they're racist. But if a leftist criticizes Candace Owens and Larry Elder, apparently that's not racist. Very intriguing formula they've come up with. Now,
you know, Jamie, that reminds me of another thing from the my experience in New Hampshire last week.
Okay.
That the gentleman Keith Hansen, who was the head of the Sullivan County Republican Party, and he invited me. He picked me up at the airport, took me over to the venue, and we had a good drive out of the airport. We were talking about all kinds of things, and he told me that other people among the Republicans there, the people who should have been standing with him against this kind of intimidation tactics and propaganda, they were telling him, look, you can't do this and get everybody mad at us. You have to not have speakers like this. And they're saying essentially we have to go along with the left when they call us names and they say we're terrible people. We have to fall into line. And why don't you just have a hot dog roast? And I think this is, unfortunately, the attitude of conservatives all over the country. When we are called racist, when we are called anti-Semitic, when we're called these totally trumped up, so to speak, totally fabricated things, then all too often the right falls into line and says, okay, yes, sir, we will do what you want.
Yeah, absolutely, Robert. And it's so telling and so clear that so much projection is going on here, because we see who the real racists are, and you wrote about this in your article. Tlaib recently toured Detroit's public safety headquarters, and as you report, she told Detroit Police Chief James Craig some very, I think a word we can use is peculiar things about facial recognition analysis in terms of African Americans. What was she saying?
Yeah, what she said, it's really kind of laughably ironic, because what she said was that the Detroit Police Department should not employ non-African Americans to use this facial recognition technology because, she said, non-African Americans think all African Americans look the same. And so you have the very intriguing prospect of Rashida Tlaib, who is not African American, saying that non-African Americans think all African Americans look the same. So apparently she thinks all African Americans look the same. But aside from the muddle in her thinking and the deep confusion in her mind, which doesn't surprise me at all, because these people are really not very bright when you come right down to it. And the left is full of leaders who they're taking their cues from, who are simply very clearly not intelligent. And she didn't realize she was incriminating herself with her choice of words. But even worse is she's asking for the old Jim Crow laws from the South in the bad old days, that people would hold certain jobs because of their race, or not hold certain jobs because of their race. And she wants it done in reverse, but it's the same thing.
Yeah. And as you write in your article, just on the left, we've got the Rachel Dolezal, Sean King. They just wanted to become persons of color, so that they just become persons of color magically, even if they're not. The Muslim quote-unquote feminist activist, if that's what we can call her, Linda Sarsour, as you also report, in one video she talked about herself being a white girl from New York before wearing the hijab, but then a couple years later in an interview, she was a person of color now, and I guess if you put the hijab on, you become a person of color, right? This is very magical. It's very magical.
Elizabeth Warren should do it, because she was the first woman of color on the Harvard faculty, and she never contradicted them. She actually called herself an Indian on another form in Texas or Oklahoma, wherever it was that she was living. But the form is available for anybody to see online. And now, of course, she admits that she doesn't have any Native American ancestry, and the whole thing She hasn't said this part, but the whole thing was clearly just an effort to gain cachet, to gain a particular status in society today. Yes. And the left, it fetishizes color and fetishizes race and racial minorities, such that it's just the opposite of the old Jim Crow era, when in the Jim Crow era, light-skinned black people would try to pass for white to escape all the discrimination. And nowadays you have white people trying to pass for black or Native American to escape the opprobrium that is being fixed by the left on being white, and to gain the victimhood status that is so prized and comes with being black or Native American. So you have Sean King, who's as white as you can be, and Linda Sarsour, who is whiter than I am, and they are people of color now.
Robert, something so, the left, obviously always an evil and sick movement, but something's really happening lately. Like, I study the left, so all my life, I'd put it on the MSNBCs and CNNs, and I study and analyze and try to expose. And before, we see the evil, but now it's almost as if, I was thinking the other day, there's just this homeless derelict out on the street at 3 in the morning, just talking, to himself out loud. That's almost what CNN and MSNBC have become. It's pure madness. 30 seconds, Robert. What's your conclusion to that?
Well, that is true, Jamie. It's very prescient and important you've been out there saying this for years, that the left is at war with reality, and insanity is that. That's what insanity is, to reject reality and to live in a fantasy world. And so the left is quite certifiably insane. And we are dealing with a great struggle of reality versus fantasy. That's what we are engaged in today.
Robert Spencer, you are a noble and courageous and good man. Keep up the fight, my friend.
You too, Jamie, and all those things are, of course, doubly true of you, and thanks for having me on.
Please keep the compliments coming, okay?
Thank you, Robert.
Make sure you go to Robert Spencer's jihadwatch.org. Keep an eye on the threat to Western civilization, and also what motivates, inspires, and sanctions that threat. That's what Jihad Watch is all about, and much more. Please remember, we're a fan-generated show. If you support what we do, go to jamieglazov.com and help us out, help us keep going, and make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel of the Glazov Gang. Good night.